Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
It's one of our most popular, most requested shows of the year, I would say, and one that I understand why Ohio State fans generally tend to enjoy it. Michigan fans tend to listen to it too. I'm not quite as sure why they do that, but we're if you're joining us, we're glad to have you here. We'll hopefully keep everyone reasonably excited for the football season, no matter what we say.
All are welcome. All are welcome. So yes, Michigan fans, Ohio State fans alike, this is our annual Tale of the Tape, looking at Ohio State versus Michigan position by position to see if, in fact, one program is better than the other, because we don't know. There's no way to tell for sure if one program has risen far above the other. So we like to just go by position by position and see if there is a trend. Maybe we can spot a trend in this rivalry, Tom. Maybe by doing this, we can sort of suss out some leanings one way or the other, because if we don't do this, there's no way to tell.
Right. And that's, I think, the biggest point here is this is all kind of a theoretical exercise. There's no way to know whether we're right or wrong. Ultimately, there's no, I don't know, like a head-to-head competition between the two sides. So this is all just kind of a theoretical exercise. Like, would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 20 duck-sized horses? Like, you'll never actually run across one horse-sized duck in your life if, unless, I say that like it couldn't happen sometime this year, but, assuming 2020 doesn't go completely off the rails, you're probably not going to fight a horse-sized duck. So it's all kind of a theoretical exercise, much like this. We can say whatever we want and we'll never know. I mean, who's been better for the last, I don't know, 2 decades, say. It's all just kind of vague, and we'll do our best to try and provide some sort of an answer, I guess.
Yeah, and like last year, much of what the show was last year is still unproven. Like when we did the Tale of the Tape, and we had Michigan with the better quarterback and with the better coaching, simply because you don't know. This is the first time out there for Justin Fields, the first time out there for Ryan Day. And I think we gave the edge to Michigan on both of those. We'll still, we'll see if that pans out or not. These things you don't get answers right away. Yeah. So we'll have to see down the road what history has to say. And that's what we'll do today. We'll go position by position, weigh maybe the pros and cons, and see where we think which team has the advantage. And Tom, I guess we should start where we started last year, which is at quarterback, where Ohio State returns Justin Fields and Michigan returns Cameron Newton. Am I reading that correct?
I don't believe he has any eligibility left, so I don't think actual Cam Newton is there. They have Joe Milton, who I have been reliably informed is almost as good as Cam Newton.
Okay,
I've seen reports to that direction, and he has, in very limited action, played a little bit against Ohio State. Scored a rushing touchdown in 2018. He lit up Rutgers last year. So, that's not something just everybody does. So must be pretty good.
Must be pretty good. And I did a Michigan Monday on the offensive side of the ball for Michigan, I think 2 weeks ago. And I went through and watched all of his passes down the field, everything beyond 7 yards that wasn't against Rutgers. And I think most of them were intercepted. So that's not a great sign, but that's your first 2 years on campus. So I'm sure it'll get better, Tom.
Well, I'm guessing that didn't take you very long, because his career numbers are 6 for 11 for 117 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. So, you could watch all of those plays and probably a replay of each of them, and probably be able to be done before a commercial break. So it'll be interesting to see. He's someone who came in. He's one of these guys who's the physically talented guy who is just a project. And this is Joe Milton. And he came in and it was like, he's going to need a couple of years. Well, now he's had a couple of years. So now let's see what they've got. Because the grade so far has to be incomplete. With all due respect to his 11 career pass attempts, outside of Rutgers, he's 3 of 7 for 58 yards and 2 picks. So he's probably good enough to beat Rutgers. I think that's safe to say. Beyond that, everything's just kind of been incomplete, which is, this is kind of where we were with Justin Fields last year, where it's like, yeah, the physical talent is there, but we haven't seen it. So you kind of got to grade him incomplete. And I think even Justin Fields had more game action in his first year than Milton had in his first 2. So, and obviously this year we're not comparing first time starter Justin Fields. So I don't want to rush on this decision, but I'm going to probably put this one in Ohio State's column even before we get to the backups.
Yeah, I will as well. And when the other aspect in this is a theory of mine, which I believe is absolutely true, in that the longer a quarterback is with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, the worse he gets. This is his 3rd year at Michigan, and no, he has no starts. But how good can he be when he's been around Jim Harbaugh so much? Now, granted, he hasn't received all of Jim Harbaugh's coaching because that was going mostly to Shea Patterson, and we saw the iffy play from him. So maybe he's been shielded by that. Here's what I expect. I expect him to be fine mostly, and then have some moments where you're like, what are you doing? That's and those what are you doing moments are going to happen at bad times. And he's going to have some moments where he certainly looks really, really good and looks like the future because he kind of needs to be. There's only, let's call it 2 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster, even though there are 3. But I just don't have any faith in Jim Harbaugh to make guys consistently better. And I the ceiling that he gets them to, he can't keep them there. He's like propping up a ceiling with yardsticks, and eventually the yardsticks snap and then the ceiling comes down, and now you've got 2 floors in your living room. It doesn't work that way, Tom. You can't build a championship house with 2 floors in the living room. Excuse
me, sir. Stop showing disrespect to the open concept that is so popular on all of those home remodeling shows. The Milton thing this year is really interesting to me because, like I said, there's no track record there. But then you had Dylan McCaffrey, whose parents were actively fighting for Michigan to play this year. Like, they were some of the most outspoken of the parents from the Michigan program. And right as they decide, okay, maybe they're going to get to play, Dylan McCaffrey transfers. Like, they had the Michigan parents had their protest, and it was like 4 days later, Dylan McCaffrey announced he was going to transfer. And this is a free year. So like, what the heck? Why are you not playing football? Even if you're upset that you're not the starting quarterback, you have nothing to lose by being on campus. There's nothing that guarantees that Joe Milton makes it through this year healthy. So you could be the starting quarterback, at that point. So that whole situation is so odd to me that I don't quite know what to make of it. The optimistic version of that story from the Michigan side is, well, Joe Milton was so clearly so much better that Dylan McCaffrey saw the writing on the wall and left. But
where's he going?
Where's he going? He gains nothing by leaving. He's just not playing this year. So like, okay, does he just not want to go through the getting up in the morning and going through the football workouts if he's not the starter? Like, of all years, the backup quarterback better be ready at every single program because you never know. So yeah, that just was very odd to me. So with him gone, it's Cade McNamara, who was a 4-star in 2019, who's basically unproven, like completely unproven, and was not someone, like, I tried to go back and read some practice reports, and there was not a whole lot of Cade McNamara buzz at any point before, like, 2 weeks ago when Cade McNamara was the backup all of a sudden, and it was like, oh yeah, no, he's good. Yeah, he's good. Which is kind of the generic. We've talked before about sort of interpreting the practice buzz, and there's like the requisite, well, I've been asked about this person, so therefore I'm going to give you an answer about this person. And then there's also the more genuine, like, this means something. It did not read as a this means something kind of comment. And then behind him is Dan Villari. You mentioned that they basically have 2 scholarship quarterbacks. The third guy this year, they had a quarterback in the 2020 class who had a heart condition and had to medically retire. So right at the last minute, they picked up a 2-star kid from Long Island. He's from Massapequa on Long Island. If you know where Jones Beach is, it's right near Jones Beach. For you
Nobody
East
knows,
Coast folks.
Tom.
For all you East Coast folks, for you non-East Coast folks, it's also right next to Amityville. And
okay, that makes sense.
If Dan Villari has to play this year, it's going to be an Amityville horror for the Michigan football program, because I don't think he's probably ready. They stole him from, I believe, Fordham, if I remember correctly. So probably not ready to be a Big Ten starting quarterback just yet.
And if he is playing against Ohio State, Michigan will want to get out of Ohio Stadium quickly. So yeah, I'm going to, in Ohio State, obviously with Gunnar Hoke behind Justin Fields and the two true freshmen of CJ Stroud and Jack Miller, who are basically versions of Cade McNamara, like highly regarded quarterbacks, just as Joe Milton was. I think Joe Milton was a top 10 quarterback as well in his class. But yeah, Tom, I think we're both going to go quarterback Ohio State here. Is that correct? Am I?
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to be accused of being a homer here, but I think Ohio State probably is a pretty safe quarterback pick. Yes.
Yeah, and notice when you don't even have to talk about the guy that you're choosing, it's because everybody already understands. Like, yeah,
you may
we don't need to spend 15 minutes on this, but we have because we care.
Hi, I'm Justin Fields. You may remember me from things like 41 touchdowns and 3 interceptions and the 2019 Heisman Trophy presentation. Yes.
There you go. So let's move to running backs, and we can go ahead and throw fullbacks in here as well because who cares? Ohio State loses J.K. Dobbins. They bring in Trey Sermon from Oklahoma. They return Master Teague, who rushed for, I believe, 789 yards last year in a backup role. They have redshirt freshman Steele Chambers as part of that depth. They've got Marcus Crowley, eventually a sophomore who will, maybe do something. And, of course, true freshman Mayan Williams. And I wrote this down, Ohio State returning, including Trey Sermon's yards, they returned 3,343 yards rushing career without DeMario McCall. Michigan, with all of their returners, 3,241 yards, 102 fewer yards for Michigan, who returns Zach Charbonnet and Hassan Haskins, the two freshman starters last year. Christian Turner was, I believe, a freshman as well last year, a limited use guy. And then they bring back Chris Evans, who was 2016, 17, and 18, was the backup to Tom. Who was it?
Oh boy.
I'll get it. Hold on. I'll get it.
You're asking me to remember something that was, it was Karan Higdon.
Devion
right?
Smith. Devion Smith and Karan Higdon. Yeah. So consecutive backup running backs to those guys. So never quite good enough to start, but certainly good enough to earn an offer as a cornerback at Ohio State back in the day. Not quite good enough to earn a scholarship offer as a running back, if I recall.
Yeah, he missed last year. There was an academic misconduct situation that he had to sit out last year. He's an interesting player. They have, I don't want to spoil the whole show. I don't think there's a spot on the field where Michigan is like the definite clear cut. Yes, they are the better team here. I think you could make an argument that this is at least kind of a push between Ohio State and Michigan, just sort of depending on how you want to weigh the talent. I don't know if you're going to see the results, because we'll get to the offensive line in a few minutes, friends. We're not there yet, but I'm not sure the results are going to look like a push. Just in terms of the talent, though, I mean, Zach Charbonnet is a good back. He had 4.9 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns as a true freshman last year. I mean, 6'1", 220 pounds. Like, he's a good size back. Chris Evans, like 5.1, 5.2 yards per carry the last couple of years that he played. 40 catches, 392 yards, 9.8 per catch in the air. Like, he's a good weapon both through the air, and he's okay on the ground. Hassan Haskins is, again, like a big dude, 5.1 yards per carry, 6'1", 220. I mean, they have a solid stable of running backs. They don't have a 2020 J.K. Dobbins, but Ohio State doesn't have a 2020 version of J.K. Dobbins either. Like, I think you could call this a push, and I wouldn't really fight you on it. But if you wanted to give it to Ohio State, you probably could. But I think I would call this like a push. What about you?
Well, you've got Master Teague, who rushed for more than either Charbonnet or Haskins. Mm-hmm. Haskins came to Michigan as a linebacker / athlete, and so had to be moved. Like I think came as a running back, had to be moved to linebacker, then had to be moved back to running back. So that's always an issue for me when you don't really have a home. But he did play well at times. Chris Evans can do some things in the passing game. I think he's a little bit of a weapon like that. I don't know how often they'll use him. If we go push, and me being one of the guys who has been down on Trey Sermon simply because I don't understand why he didn't get the football at Oklahoma. And if you don't get the football, then maybe they don't want you to have it. It's crazy theory. Then how can he be like the second coming at Ohio State this year? And so, yeah, I can go ahead with a push here. I hadn't anticipated that, but you make a strong argument, Tom, by saying like, well, I mean, who is standing out for the Buckeyes? We saw the way Master Teague ended the season with everybody being disappointed in it, basically, including himself. We think Trey Sermon's going to be fine. I like Ohio State's depth better, and I think they've got more guys that you can throw out there, and they'll get 1,200 yards for you. I think maybe you've got two guys that can maybe get 1,200 yards for you, and it might take a few more carries at Michigan to do that. But sure, why not? Let's throw the Wolverines a bone because there's not gonna be many more to come, I don't think. So we can call it a push if you want.
And there's another guy who's just sort of probably not going to be an impact guy this year necessarily, but just someone to sort of keep in mind. Blake Corum, who's a running back, little dude. He's listed at 5'8", 193, and usually when you're listed at 5'8", it means you're 5'6", and sometimes when you're 5'6", you're really 5'5". I mean, so 5'8", not 193 does not seem like a between the tackles back probably, but he may be someone that they can use, get him in space and do something with him. He's just like. Those guys who Ohio State coaches just talk glowingly about. Corum is one of those like real high makeup guys who is also a very fast player. There were references to him as, quote, Mike Hart, but fast. So, if he ends up as some like 80% version of J.K. Dobbins in a couple of years, like, yeah, they would probably gleefully take that. I don't think he's probably there yet. I don't think he's probably necessarily even freshman year J.K. Dobbins, because I think freshman year J.K. Dobbins was a little bigger than that. But, he's someone that's just kind of worth keeping an eye on, and maybe someone that we're talking about when we're doing the show this, next year, the year after that.
I think there's definitely potential in this room, and Zach Charbonnet is I think maybe he's better than what he'll get to show based on the offensive line and this next position group, the receivers that we can talk about. So we'll go ahead and give the running backs a push. We'll just, no need for people to be fighting in our mentions about this, although go ahead. It fuels us. Let's go with the receivers because I have some major issues with Michigan's receivers.
Such as the good one is gone and not coming back. Is that one of the issues? Because that Michigan receiver room looks a whole lot different if Nico Collins is in it than if he isn't.
Exactly. And so with him opting out, it doesn't look like he's going to come back because they play this week and he's still not back.
He's still listed on their roster. I saw him listed on their roster, which is, I don't know.
It's Jerry Glanville leaving tickets for Elvis at the box office.
Jim Harbaugh sitting out in the pumpkin patch, waiting for the great pumpkin to come. Oh, please let Nico Collins come back this week.
Nico, is that you?
No,
it's not Nico. Without Nico Collins, and Tariq Black is off to Texas. Donovan Peoples-Jones is off to Cleveland. All they have back are slot receivers. And Ronnie Bell led the team in catches last year, but he did that out of the slot. That's where he's comfortable. And that was with all of the outside receivers we just talked about, taking a lot of the attention away. If he moves outside, which he probably has to, because now you've still got Giles Jackson, Mike Sainra still, and freshman AJ Henning. All of these guys are diminutive. I think Cornelius Johnson, the redshirt freshman, is the only scholarship receiver over 6 foot tall. So now you've got Ronnie Bell. If he's playing outside, can he get off of press coverage? He's not going to be facing any linebackers or safeties or slot corners anymore. He's going to be facing NFL guys defending him. Can he handle that? And then you've got all of these other little guys. Somebody else is going to have to play outside. Can they handle the blocking there? Can they handle playing against real live corners and not just running free against safeties and linebackers? And so I have a major issue with all of these receivers. I know Michigan fans love Ronnie Bell, and he's way exceeded his recruiting rankings when he was, not even in the top 1,000 because he was a basketball player when Jim Harbaugh found him. But I don't know what kind of outside receiver he can be. Maybe he's going to be very good. I do know that I don't expect him to be Nico Collins, the guy who turns 50-50 balls into 80-20 balls. I don't know that they have that. And I know they've needed that to be a successful passing game over the years. And I don't know where that's going to come from. I don't have much expectations for these guys to – I know Michigan fans they love the speed that these guys have, and that's fine. But, Tom, do you remember the last time Michigan had a bunch of tiny wide receivers and how that turned out for them?
I think it ended up with Brady Hoke showing up a few years later. And, that was okay for a while until it wasn't. So, yeah, this is an interesting group because, like you said, Ronnie Bell, I think, is a very solid wide receiver. I think Ronnie Bell is absolutely one of the, 6 quote unquote starters if he's at Ohio State. He's probably somewhere on the field in that group. He last year, 48 for 758, 15.8 yards per catch, had scored only 1 touchdown. All anyone remembers about Ronnie Bell last year was the drop against Penn State, which is really, really not fair because he had a really good year outside of that. And I think he had one other pretty big drop, but outside of that, he had a really nice year. But when you go from the guy who's matched up against the third best corner to the guy who's matched up against the best corner, all of a sudden life gets a little more difficult. And, that he may not match those numbers this year. And if he doesn't, the rest of the wide receiver unit is like you said, Giles Jackson, 5'9", AJ Henning, 5'10", Mike Sandersell, 5'10", Roman Wilson, 6 foot. And again, when you're listed as 6 foot, that means you're really about 5'10" and a half. So the only guy who's tall, who's like a legit big outside wide receiver is Cornelius Johnson. He's 6'3" from the mean streets of Greenwich, Connecticut. He was a top 200 guy. But 4 catches, 61 yards, a touchdown in the waning minutes of the game against Michigan State last year. That's it. So the sum total of your big wide receiver production last year is 4 catches for 61 yards. So I don't know what a reasonable expectation is here. I don't know if anyone other than Ronnie Bell has any kind of a real case to be one of the top 6 wide receivers between Ohio State and Michigan this year. Would you put anyone else in that group?
No. And Giles Jackson is more of a jet sweep guy. That's where he's made his hay. Mike Sainer still is a guy they liked last year, is really fast, but are you going to put him on the field instead of Garrett Wilson or Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tom?
No, I would say probably not. And, the fast thing is great. Fast, speedy, short guys is great until you run up against a team with cornerbacks like Ohio State, which are probably just as fast and also bigger. And it's then that limits your ability to utilize those fast guys. So, yeah, I think this is one of the easier ones on the field that this, outside of quarterback, outside of quarterback and a few we're going to get to in just a second. I think this is probably one of the easier decisions on the field.
And this is with Ohio State having 3 true freshmen in the 2 deep, and 4 in the 3 deep, basically, with Mookie Cooper being another inside guy. Mookie Cooper is the 4th receiver that we're talking about, and he was ranked ahead of AJ Henning, who was Michigan's top overall recruit in the 2020 class, who they are hoping for some big things from this year. And that's a guy that the comparison at Ohio State, Mookie Cooper, maybe they can find some room for him because they've got plenty of other guys. And there's no Chris Olave, there's no Garrett Wilson on this Michigan roster. And so, yeah, that one's an emphatic Ohio State for me, Tom, for you as well. And I'll be interested to see what they get out of Cornelius Johnson. I watched him play every year. I watched the Michigan play every game last year. I don't remember him doing anything. And I do remember Sainer still, and I do remember Giles Jackson and these other guys. I don't remember him doing a thing. But when you're playing behind Nico Collins and they don't have the depth to rotate, that's not a huge thing, especially if I'm not going to watch the last 2 minutes of a game because, what's the point when the game is already over and I'm tired and I'm just trying to get Michigan Monday done, Tom. I don't have time for the last 2 minutes of a game that no longer matters. That is over, you know?
Yeah, I could agree with that. And, you know, I mean, if you're a true freshman, especially a true freshman coming out of Connecticut, where high school football is not what it is in the Midwest, you are not going to necessarily be an immediate impact guy. So the fact that he wasn't a contributor last year doesn't mean that he's not going to be a contributor this year. But, you know, you have guys who come in. I think Ohio State's freshman wide receivers last year and this year, probably 6 of them are going to put up bigger numbers than, you know, any of the Michigan freshmen did last year. So, and maybe even this year. So, you know, that's a pretty good, you know, barometer of where things stand right there.
Yeah. So let's go to tight ends, where Michigan returns Nick Eubanks, who's a very good tight end, 25 catches, 243 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. And Luke Schoonmaker, 2 catches, 54 yards. I'm sure there's some recruits as well and some other guys, but it's mainly Eric All. He played quite a bit last year, didn't really do any catching. So you've got those 3 guys. And even though, you know, to compare like catches between Michigan tight ends and Ohio State tight ends, I don't know that that's the best way to compare the two, because Michigan throws their tight ends and Ohio State kind of doesn't. But, you know, Luke Farrell had 7, Jeremy Ruckert had 14. So those two combined basically produced what Nick Eubanks did. I like Ohio State's depth better. Eubanks is and it's strange because he was kind of a downfield guy earlier in his career than, you know, last year, under 10 yards a catch. But that's also where I think Jeremy Ruckert was, like 14 for 143. And we know he can be more of a downfield threat. So we'll see where that goes this year. Overall, I just like Ohio State's depth better. I think Luke Farrell is really underrated because he's a complete tight end. And just because he doesn't catch the ball every week doesn't mean that he's not out there for a good reason. And I think you're going to see a better Jeremy Ruckert this year, a more complete Jeremy Ruckert. And I think you're going to have to, because the Buckeyes are going to play more 3 receiver sets, and they're going to play fewer 2 tight end sets, I think, because they have a second H in Jackson Smith-Njigba, who will keep that second tight end on the bench more. So that means Jeremy Ruckert will have to do more blocking and in his time on the field. But I still like Ohio State's tight ends better. We didn't even talk about Jake Hausman, and we both saw what Cade Stover was doing in the spring. You look at like Cade Stover is their 3rd or probably I'd say 4th tight end right now, and I think there might be 1 tight end. Eubanks would be the only tight end on Michigan's roster I'd take over him right now.
Well, this is one of those things where if you flip them, you put the Ohio State tight ends on the Michigan roster, they put up more. They're way more productive than the Michigan tight ends would be. And if you put the Michigan tight ends on the Ohio State roster, I mean, they're not going to be more productive for sure. Mm-hmm. This is also probably a little bit the inverse of the running backs, where, you know, the running backs, we said kind of, yeah, the talent's equal-ish, but Ohio State's probably going to get better production because of the system and the strengths of the offense. This is probably a little bit the opposite, where Ohio State probably has a more talented group, but might not get the production that Michigan does based on the system and the fact that Michigan throws the tight end a lot more because because Ohio State's throwing to the talented stable of wide receivers, which, hey, we just had that conversation. So yeah, this is probably a relatively easy pick towards Ohio State, just based on the talent, based on the depth. I mean, this is going to be a recurring theme, I think, during the show, the depth that Ohio State has that Michigan doesn't have. That is going to be, I mean, of all years, depth is going to be real important this year. And Ohio State has it at tight end in a way that Michigan kind of doesn't right now. And, you know, ultimately, I think that plus, you know, which of these tight ends is going to get picked first in the NFL draft? I'll take Jeremy Ruckert. You take the field. You want to take that bet?
No.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. So, yeah, I think this is one of those things that the stats won't necessarily look like it at the end of the year, but I think this is pretty easily in Ohio State.
Yeah. So that moves us to a much tougher discussion, Tom, or not, the offensive line, where Ohio State replaces 2 starters in Jonah Jackson at left guard and Brandon Bowen at right tackle. That's going to be tough for them, but it seems like it's already done, so it must have been easy. Harry Miller goes to left guard, and it's looking more and more like Nicholas Petit-Frere, the former 5-star #1 offensive tackle in the 2018 class, will be at right tackle. And as we've talked about many times, there's a 2 deep there that they like. There's maybe more depth than they've ever had, and they're just crafting it to see how they best want to utilize it. Which then takes us over to the other side, let's talk a little bit about Ohio State. Okay, Wyatt Davis, All-American, really good. Josh Myers, Remington Trophy candidate, possible All-American, really good. Thayer Munford, All Big Ten, really good. And then, Harry Miller, the most praised true freshman in Ohio State history based on what his teammates and coaches have said before he ever played a snap. Nicholas Petit-Frere, the best diet ever from a player who got to eat like 8,000 to 10,000 calories a day, and who wouldn't love that? So that's just the starting 5. And then it goes beyond that. DeJuan Jones, 6'8", 365 dunk machine, who could be their 6th guy at guard or tackle. So let's talk then about Michigan, where right tackle Jalen Mayfield's back.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's positive. He was one of those players who, like Wyatt Davis, like Shaun Wade, had opted out and then opted back in, and he's going to be a real solid right tackle for them. And he's someone who's going to be in the NFL draft this time next year. I mean, that's someone who has a pro career ahead of him probably, and that's great. And then what happened? And the answer is, tell me about all the other starters. Well, all right, we're out of time. See you next show. Yeah, they have 4 new starters on the offensive line, and you're reading the kind of brave-faced quotes about, Ed Warner's really great about developing. Okay, that's great. It's better than having a great offensive line coach, having 3 returning starters, a 5-starter plug-in at left guard, a 5-starter plug-in at right tackle, another 5-starter plug-in at backup right tackle. What's better than having one good offensive line coach? That's a lot better. So. Ryan Hayes, left tackle, first-time starter. He played a couple games last year, started a couple games last year. I mean, it's a little bit telling to me that they kept Jalen Mayfield on the right-hand side and they put Hayes on the left-hand side. Like that seems like, if you're just kind of reading the tea leaves, that's like, okay, they probably think they have something there. That doesn't match up real well with a third-year starter like Thayer Munford, but okay, that's fine. Like, that's good. Chuck Filiaga at left guard. He was like a borderline top 100 guy out of high school, but this is his 4th year and he's like barely played. No starts. He appeared in 4 games in each of the last 2 years. That's not a great sign that you weren't, the guy who was the fill-in starter at some point. Andrew Vastardis, 5th-year former walk-on. And This is his first time. Like, that's like, I know they had a good line last year. So it's like, okay, there's a reason you weren't playing ahead of some of the guys they had. They just lost 4 guys the NFL draft, but like, that's not a great sign. You don't have a lot of those guys who turn into, first-team All-Americans. Andrew Stueber's at right guard. He started a couple games at right tackle a couple years ago, missed all of last year with an injury. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, if things break well, they could have the 3rd best offensive line in the conference. If things really break well and Ed Warner does a great job developing those guys, but Ohio State might have the best offensive line in the country, so this isn't really much of a conversation. Yeah,
and for as good as Ed Warner is at bringing an offensive line together, I still want to know why last year's offensive line, with now 4 NFL players and a 5th when Mayfield eventually gets there, wasn't all that good. The running game wasn't very good. Was it all the fault of the quarterback? No, I don't think so. There's just like maybe the parts are better than the sum. I don't know. I wasn't really overly impressed with really anybody on the offensive line. And I know, Tom, I don't know if you know this, Jalen Mayfield single-handedly shut down Chase Young last year. Now, if you go back and watch it, you'll see a lot of chipping. You'll see a lot of double teaming. You'll see some triple teaming. You'll see a lot of running away from Chase Young. While Jalen Mayfield is single-handedly stopping him. But let's digress. And then you look at the backups, and you got a bunch of 3-star guys that litter everybody's 2 deep in the Big Ten. But if I think anytime you've got a fifth-year former walk-on who has been given a scholarship as your center, I mean, but that's also Michigan. They've been doing that for a while now, and it has worked out for them before. And so maybe it's not the worst thing. It's certainly not the best thing, though, Tom. And it's certainly not enough to get them over the hump here in this tail of the tape against Ohio State's offensive line, which is so far superior. I would say the better question would be Ohio State's second-team offensive line against Michigan's first-team offensive line.
There's a conversation to be had there, and I probably would go with Michigan, probably just because that Ohio State line is going to be backup line is going to be pretty young. I mean, you'd have a true freshman right tackle, potentially, true freshman right tackle, potentially a true freshman left tackle. But you've got like a Matthew Jones who was a top 50 player in the country. You've got DeJuan Jones who looked real good last year. You've got Luke Whippler, who's already lost his black stripe, who's been pretty impressive. I mean, who again was like a top 100 player. Like, just the talent level there is better. And you can do it with the development model, and that's something that like Michigan State has done great with. Michigan State has, does not get 5-star offensive linemen, but they just kind of keep developing them into a good, solid offensive line unit. Wisconsin has done much the same, but there's a ceiling for those teams. Like, you have to have, like, that's great. It's great that you can develop guys to a certain level to be like a 10-win team. Like, that's great. There's another level above that, and you can't get to that level with those guys. Like, it just doesn't happen. And that's kind of where Michigan is. Like, if it all breaks right, it's a 10-win ceiling, like a normal season 10-win. Not this year. Not going to be a 10-win team this year, but
you think so?
Normal season, like a 10-2 team that. This is what Wisconsin is. Wisconsin is a good team. They do it better than anyone else does. They develop these offensive linemen. They develop these running backs. And it's like, wow, they're a really good, solid team. And everyone talks about how well, great fundamentals and all of that. And then when was the last time Wisconsin beat Ohio State? It's been a minute. And generally Wisconsin has lost, I think, 4 straight Rose Bowls, because when you play a team like Oregon that recruits sort of on that same level as Ohio State, like all of a sudden, like, you're just a little bit short. And that's kind of where Michigan is, I think, on the offensive line, where it could be pretty okay this year if things really work and develop as well as Michigan fans are sort of hoping and crossing their fingers that they will. But still, there's that ceiling there that I don't think they can crack.
Yep, I'm with you. Which takes us to defensive line, where I'm a little torn here, because Michigan defensive ends Aiden Hutchinson and Kwity Paye were both very productive last year. Hutchinson, let me just get to the stats here. Kwity Paye 12.5 tackles for loss. Hutchinson 10.5. They didn't have nearly as many sacks, but they were more disruptive than anybody Ohio State has returning. I think some of that is because Chase Young stole all of the stats last year. But if you look at just like those two, they returned 22.5 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, 118 tackles, very active tackling, which also tells you that they played an awful lot, which they did, because that is something that Michigan's defensive line has lacked forever, which is depth. When you look at the 5 defensive ends at Ohio State that will be playing this year, they had 15.5 tackles for loss, which is 7 fewer than Hutchinson and Paye. They had the same 11 sacks, and this is while playing with Chase Young and missing out on all of those sacks that he got. But they had 64 tackles compared to the Michigan duo's 118. So I think that group is kind of a wash to me. And no, there's no Hutchinson, there's no Paye in terms of in terms of the stats last year, but we're also projecting here. And we didn't do a great job of projecting last year in terms of the quarterback position when we did this, even though we said, just know at the end, it's probably going to be Justin Fields. But because there is no track record, we'll go ahead and give it to Shea Patterson. I don't want to do that again. Like, there's Tyreek Smith, there's Tyler Friday, there's Zach Harrison, there's Javonte Jean-Baptiste, there's Jonathan Cooper. There's 5 guys that could all start at Michigan. And when I say start at Michigan, be part of their 3-man rotation with those with Pay and Hutchinson. Because, and I don't know if Michigan fans know this, you don't have to just play the same 2 defensive ends over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Eventually they get tired. And sometimes they get tired late in the game. And then that leads to all kinds of trouble. So I think, Tom, I can go ahead and go with the defensive ends being a push. And I think this is Michigan's best argument to win this is Hutchinson and Pay. And I know Michigan fans will be like, well, how dare you? These 2 are the best defensive ends in the Big Ten. And that may be, I don't think it's true. I think they're good. I don't know that either of them were ever, I don't want to say the Bosa word, because I'll let the Hutchinson family do that for me, Tom. Or if you wanted to get into that, you can go ahead. But they were fine last year. They were never like, oh my gosh, these guys are incredible.
Yeah, they were both good, but I mean the Bosas were far more productive than either of those guys. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson last year played in all 13 games, 4.5 sacks. I mean, there were games where Joey Bosa or Nick Bosa or Chase Young had close to 4.5 sacks. I mean, Chase Young had 4 sacks in just against Wisconsin last year. We just finished talking about how great Wisconsin's offensive line is. So yeah, it's fine. Like Aiden Hutchinson's a good defensive end. Aiden Hutchinson could be a 1st-round draft pick. Aiden Hutchinson is not going to be a top 5 draft pick next year. And when you start talking about Bosa's, they're both top 5 draft picks. When you talk about Chase Young, he was a top 5 draft pick. If you're not going to be a top 5 draft pick, that's not a good comparison. Kwity Paye is a very, very athletic. I mean, he's one of the guys who shows up on those freaks list. Like he's a very, very, very athletic guy. 6.5 sacks last year. Very good player. They have a very good first string at defensive end. And I don't know if I would say that it's significantly better than, you put Zach Harrison next to Kwity Paye. Zach Harrison had 3.5 sacks last year as a true freshman. So how much better is he going to be this year? Probably significantly better. Is he going to be kind of what Kwity Paye was this time last year? Like, yeah, I think that's at least a reasonable baseline for what Zach Harrison could be this year. And you've got Tyreek Smith on the other side. I would put Tyreek Smith in the same conversation as Aiden Hutchinson. And then you have all the other guys who we haven't even talked about yet, who Michigan doesn't have answers to the next few guys in line that Ohio State has. Like the depth that Ohio State has is so much greater. And that's something that's important during a normal year where, I mean, like you talked about, that adds up over the course of the season when you've got guys who are just playing 30 snaps a game, can stay a lot fresher. Towards the end of the game, this opposing offensive tackles start getting tired. You have fresh legs. You just keep rolling in and rolling in and rolling in. And you start really building up some stats there and being the fresher side there towards the end of the game. Michigan just doesn't have that. They just don't have that depth. And that's in a normal year. This year, with, as much of the injury and COVID kind of concerns as there are, if one of those defensive ends for Michigan goes down, like there's just the depth is just not there. If Ohio State loses one of its defensive ends, they've got another 4 guys they can throw in there that are starter quality, and they'll miss whoever is out, but it won't be like a death blow for the team. Michigan just all the way across that defensive line is like the top line's fine, but after that it's like, it gets thin pretty quick.
I'm just looking at their split stats. Hutchinson and Paye in from August and September and October had 10 tackles for loss. In November, 2.5. And Aiden Hutchinson in August and September and October totaled 6.5 tackles for loss. In November, 2. So it tells you, like, even though they're playing the same amount of games each month, the production declines. And we saw that. We see that every year. We see that every game where they wear down, and it's because they don't have the depth. And the same thing I think will hold true at a defensive tackle this year, where they've got more names, but I don't know that they have any more production. I mean, these are all guys who have been around. I mean, Carlo Kemp is good. He's fine. And he's actually pretty active. Had like 40 some tackles, I think, last year. And has been around a long time. Chris Hinton, I think they keep waiting. I was reading an interview a couple of weeks ago where Don Brown was talking about all of these guys who are looking good on the defensive line and never mentioned Chris Hinton. And so it's like, well, I thought, isn't he going to be like one of your starters? Wouldn't you remember one of your starters as you're running down your entire roster of guys? And I know he's a guy that they seemingly just keep wanting to see more of, and the fans just expect that it's going to happen. And I think we've seen enough top 100 guys at Michigan to know that it doesn't just happen, and something needs to take place for it to happen. Like the work needs to be put in or something of that nature. And so we'll see what happens with Chris Hinton. Who knows? I don't have a whole bunch of expectations until I see more out of him. I'm not just going to think it's going to happen. There's other guys that we've seen around behind them all who don't really show up in the tackles because, like Donovan Jeter has been around for a long time. Luigi Villan as a defensive end, but like all of these guys we've been hearing about for a while that they're just names in the background as like Don Brown or whomever talks about the defense. And it's like, yeah, okay, but let's see them do something because they don't. And when they're in the game, they're just in the game. They're not making plays. They're not doing anything. They're just giving breathers at this point.
Right. There's a lot of names on this list that are like, oh, that guy's still around. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the stats, and it's like, oh, like names that aren't guys who've been super productive. I mean, Chris Hinton and Mozzie Smith are at the nose. Like those are sophomores, and okay, they should be probably, hopefully more productive. I mean, if Don Brown's not talking about Chris Hinton, like that's not a real good sign. Donovan Jeter's been around forever and a day, and you remember him because his last name. It's like, oh yeah, Derek Jeter, Donovan Jeter. Okay, great, yeah, and like, I mean, he hasn't ever been a super productive player. Carlo Kemp is good, but he's not fantastic. Like there's a bunch of like, yeah, they're fine. And this is one of the spots where when we're talking about Ohio State this year, especially that 3-tech spot is, I mean, that's basically the universal consensus right now is like, that's the concern this year. The 3-tech spot is the biggest concern for Ohio State this year. And I don't know that this is, I don't think I can clearly give this to Michigan as even at the spot that is Ohio State's biggest concern. I don't know that Michigan is clearly better. And if Teron Vincent is back in there and Haskell Garrett is back in there, once they get back on the field, I think Ohio State probably is clearly better. Right now, there's depth issues because of the injuries and all of that. But, that's something that Ohio State has the opportunity to add two pretty high-level players, whether it's, 3-4 games into the season. Michigan is what it is. And this is probably not as bad as it was last year. I mean, last year, the defensive tackle, when we did this show last year, it was just kind of like we got the defensive tackles. And it's like, and this is why they're going to get murdered a couple times. And then guess what? They got murdered a couple times. Like, if you don't have defensive tackles, seeing Wisconsin on that schedule is bad news. And they have Wisconsin on the schedule again this year. And so, yeah, it's better than it was last year, but it's not great. I mean, they just lost Mike Dwumfor to Rutgers, and he's another of those guys who was like, yeah, you kind of knew the name, but he wasn't ever real productive. But it's just, that's another body that would be like, that's a Big Ten caliber player that would at least be able to give them something inside, and he's gone now. He's at Rutgers.
So last year, like Michigan would have to put Ben Mason on a defensive line to round things out. Ohio State may do like Tyler Friday or something like that, but Tyler Friday is a defensive lineman. He's not a fullback. So even moving him inside at times at the 3-tech, he's doing something he's familiar with. It's not foreign to him. They're not having to teach him things. So even the lack of depth at Ohio State, they're still filling it with guys who want to play there and have some experience. So I'm going with Ohio State there because of the numbers, the production, and the possibility of more guys coming in down the road. Where is that where you are as well?
Yeah, I mean, if we're combining these two and just doing the defensive line unit, I think it's definitely Ohio State. I think you could make an argument to push one of them if you want to split them up, but I mean, give Ohio State defensive ends based on the depth and the probably the quality plus the depth, and then push the defensive tackles based on the fact that you don't know what's going to happen with Teron Vincent and Haskell Garrett. Like, I mean, you could talk me into that, but I think if you just did it all as one, I think you'd give it to Ohio State. And I don't think, Michigan doesn't have anyone on the inside, I think, who is as good as Tommy Togiai. That's the other thing. I think
that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I think the best player at either three tech or nose for either of those teams is Tommy Togiai. And, when in doubt, side with the best player. And I mean, I think at defensive end, ultimately the best player will probably end up being Zach Harrison. On the inside, I think ultimately the best player is going to be Tommy Togiai. In terms of like who is the highest NFL draft pick, probably those two guys out of those two rooms or two position groups. So, if you do that, I think you have to give to Ohio State.
Yeah, because I'm like you with the defensive tackles. I think I talked to you about this last week where I'm not sure, but then if you just weigh it down, like, okay, well, who is better than Tommy Togiai? And if the answer is nobody, then you're going to go with Ohio State. And I think the answer is nobody, even though we really haven't seen a lot from him. But I would be shocked if he's not everything everybody has thought he could be this year. And we should see that pretty early on. So, Tom, let's move to linebackers, where Ohio State returns 4 seniors, 3 juniors, a couple of redshirt freshmen, and probably a sophomore. Probably there's a number of guys at linebacker for Ohio State. They do lose a starter in Malik Harrison, but they return guys like we know Pete Werner. He's been a starter. Tuff Borland has been a starter. Baron Browning has started. Justin Hilliard has started a couple of games. So they've got 4 guys, those 4 seniors, all very experienced, with Browning and Hilliard probably sharing a dual role in this defense, and Borland and Pete Werner being absolutely fine, and top 100 guys behind them trying to play. Then you look at Michigan's linebacker crew with redshirt sophomore Cameron Grown at middle linebacker, who played really well in his first year as a starter last year. So, if you want to make an argument about like each position by position, maybe you could talk about McGrone versus Tuff Borland and maybe give that one to Michigan. Josh Ross, I think, missed much of last year, is back at the will. So those two are fine. New Viper and Mike Barrett, who was a quarterback in high school, like an option type guy, and came to Michigan as possibly a safety, receiver, running back type thing, who has now become that hybrid linebacker, safety, pretend bullet that Ohio State used to have that they no longer do, but maybe they do. Who knows? So he's that hybrid guy. And then there's Sam that splits snaps with the Viper. Looks like it's going to be redshirt sophomore Ben Van Sumeren, who is a former running back. A former big running back, kind of a fullback, like, I don't know, like 6'2", 250 or something, a decent-sized guy. And when half of your linebackers are played for other positions, like played offense, I do think that is a failing of recruiting. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm saying when you don't have guys who were playing that position in high school or weren't recruited for these roles, there's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some issues there. And I think you'll see that this year. And I don't think it's a way to succeed. I don't think it's a path to success. Now, there's always room for those guys. Like Cameron Martinez, quarterback, you know he's not going to be an option quarterback in college, and then you find a way for him. But if there's too many of those guys, then you start to wonder, like, why can't you just recruit corners, linebackers, defensive, and why can't you just recruit the guys that are going to play these positions? So we'll see how those guys do. I think it's overwhelmingly Ohio State on this one.
This is, to me, maybe the strongest unit on the entire Michigan team. And I don't know that they're clearly better than Ohio State. That's I think, this is clearly probably the strongest unit on the Michigan team. It is not clearly the strongest unit on the Ohio State team. And there's probably several units that are stronger than this for Ohio State, but it's just the depth is so great for Ohio State in a way that just isn't for Michigan. And, you talked about sort of the project or, moving guys around linebacker model that they're using a lot. And it's like, I'm sure as you're talking about that, everyone's going, yes, but what about Darren Lee? And like, yes, Darren Lee was a very good option quarterback in high school who turned into a very good weak side linebacker at Ohio State. Okay. Yep. That's good. And they've moved guys, you take the safeties and you move them to linebacker. And you mentioned Cam Martinez. Like that is a perfectly viable way to do it. Ohio State also is recruiting 5-star linebackers like Baron Browning and 4-star linebackers like Pete Werner. And, Dallas Gant and Kayvon Pope and Taraja Mitchell were all 4 or 5-star linebackers. This is their third year in the program. And they're all, they're still depth guys. And it's not that they're not good. It's not that they have shown that they can't play. It's just that Ohio State has so much depth that those guys have not been starters yet. And Cam McGrone is really good. Cam McGrone is a future all Big Ten player at Mike. And like you said, if you wanted to give Mike to Michigan, yeah, absolutely. That's fine. I would have no issue with that. I don't know that it's totally clear cut based on some of the other guys Ohio State has at Mike, but this seems like a year that this could be the Baron Browning, the Baron Browning breakout year that everyone's sort of been waiting for forever. Because I think he was a little bit miscast in that middle linebacker role. And, that's we can have a conversation about who was the person who decided that was a good idea, but I don't think that person's on staff anymore at Ohio State. So I guess there's you can make a case for Michigan in some places there, but I think on the whole, you probably have to go with Ohio State there. Just on the whole, that's a better. That's a better unit. Maybe if Michigan had a linebackers coach like Al Washington, but I don't know when they would have an opportunity to have a guy like that on their staff.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for them. He could really do something for them. So that takes us, Tom. Let's just do the secondary as a whole, because it's not great here. Where Michigan returns both safeties, which. Well, I shouldn't say that. Josh Metellus is long gone, which is probably a good thing, in my opinion. He's being replaced by Daxton Hill, who was their 5-star freshman last year, slot guy, their nickel guy who did well. And Brad Hawkins now is, I guess I'm going to assume he's the strong safety, while Daxton Hill is the free safety. Hawkins has never really done much for me in that role, and he's fine. He's not great. I don't know, but do we want to break this down by corners and safeties, because there might be a way to give Michigan one here with the safeties. That's for sure.
That's fine. If you want to split it up, that's fine. Let's talk. You want to talk corners first? We can talk.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do corners first.
So I mean, Ohio State. This is basically comes down to one guy in each team opted out. One of them opted back in. The other one did not. So Sean Wade is there. Embry Thomas is not. And end of discussion. Like that's
that's easy enough.
Yeah, Ohio State does. This is another spot where Ohio State does not have a ton of depth. This is a spot where Ohio State there are concerns. There are concerns for Ohio State that you've got Sean Wade, you've got Cam Brown, you've got Seven Banks. Like those are, one sure thing. Two, like, yeah, probably going to be okay. Got Marcus Williams in the slot, like probably going to be okay, but there's not a ton of depth there. You get to the true freshman on that depth chart pretty quickly, which is not a great sign. But then on the Michigan side of the ball,
not better.
Like, yeah, you don't have a Sean Wade, and also the depth is a concern, and to the point where they had toyed with the idea of moving Daxton Hill to corner from safety, and like he's an incredible athlete. He's someone who, we can go through the, how many guys on Michigan would start at Ohio State or be, at least like in a conversation with Ohio State to start. And he's one of them, but he's fantastic. But if you're moving guys to sort of patch holes, like during fall camp, that's not a good sign, especially when you're moving safeties to corner. Like you never want to be moving safeties to corner. Like corners to safety, that's fine. Safety to corner is like, well, we don't have a shortstop, so we're going to move our third baseman to shortstop. It's like, no. You want to be going the other direction. You don't want to be going that direction. So that's a concern, because you've got They ended up moving Sammy Foston from safety to corner. That was that was what they did instead of moving Daxton Hill from safety to corner, which is just like, well, you still have Daxton Hill at safety, but you did have to move a safety to corner, which again, like that is like a major red flag. Vincent Gray sounds like he's going to be one of those spots. He was their third guy last year. So, okay. All right. That's fine. There's one of your spots. Jamon Green, I guess, is the guy on the other side, but I mean, relatively unproven. And, DJ Turner, Jalen Perry. Okay, but they have fewer proven commodities there. And the guys that they're kind of dealing with on that depth chart are just not as highly rated as recruits as the guys that Ohio State has. So, these stars do not always equal success, but when in doubt, you would always rather have a, top 100 kind of corner that to slide in there. If you know nothing else, you'd rather have a top 100 guy than like a top 250 guy. And Ohio State, I think, has Sean Wade, which pretty much ends the argument right there. Cause it's like, who's the best player? That's it. End of discussion. But Ohio State could have 3 of the top 4, that would not be unrealistic to think that Ohio State has 3 of the top 4, or, at the end of the year, we're talking about Ohio State having 3 of the 4 best corners between these two teams.
When you mentioned the top 200 or whatever, there are, some of these top 700, reaches in just lack of recruiting, really, where they're just looking for guys and settling, I would say, because it's not like these guys are all just February 2nd, grabs. Like, this is all we could get. A lot of these guys aren't. They're, like I said, it's settling. It's not ideal for a Big Ten title program when you've got so many low rated guys and Jamon Green, Jalen Perry, DJ Turner, like these are all guys who have yet to do anything. Vincent Gray is another one of these low rated guys who flashed at times last year, but he wasn't great. And who knows if he's any good. And we'll know soon enough, probably within a few days, actually. By the weekend, we'll have a pretty good idea of just how good these guys are and at corner. And yeah, so I'll go Ohio State there very confidently, even if Ohio State only has 2 working corners this year.
Yeah, and I was looking up Denzel Ward because I'm like, I can make a point with Denzel Ward about sometimes you don't need to be a top 50, a 250 kind of player to be a to turn into an impact player. But Denzel Ward was 270. So, he wasn't top 250, but he was basically top 250. And like those guys are fine. Like 100% of the time, it is fine to have like Damon Arnett was another guy like that, where he wasn't like a top 100 recruit. And I think people looked at him like, why are they wasting a scholarship on that guy? And like, if you have good coaching, you can develop those guys, but not all of those guys are going to develop. Like your hit rate is not anywhere close to 100% on those guys. So if you have like certain things you're really looking for and you get those diamond in the rough kind of guys, like great. Yeah, you can hit on some of those. But if you have the top 25 guy nationally, like Sean Wade, like Jeff Okuda, like guess what? The hit rate on those is a lot higher than the top, 300 top. I mean, Gray, you just talked about, he was literally number 700 in his class. And it sounds like they've hit on him and he's turned into a good solid player for him. But, if all you're going to tell me is the best corner on one team was the number 700 player in his class, and the best corner on the other team was the number, what was Sean Wade, 18 or something in his class, like I can tell you who I'm going to bet on, and it's not number 700.
Well, and even when Ohio State signs Damon Arnett, it's because they had to replace Jamel Dean.
Yeah.
And so it was a late thing. But yeah, if they like guys, they go and get them, and that's fine. And it's all about talent evaluation, which we all thought I thought Jim Harbaugh was very good at it when he got to Michigan. I expected him to excel at talent evaluation and talent development. Neither of those have really been all that true. And that's part of the reason why he is 0 forever right now against the Buckeyes. But maybe there's hope at safety. Now, as I said, I'm not a big believer in Brad Hawkins. I think he's just a guy. He's, there's not much you can say about him, really. I mean, he's been there for a while. He 53 tackles last year. There's I'm just looking at stats, like one pass broken up. Okay, that's not a lot. There's no plays being made. There's nothing like, oh, you got to watch out for this guy because he'll do this. And it's like, well, no, he really won't. But we know that they do have Daxton Hill, who, if he stays where he is, but I don't think he will, because I think he's going to slide down to slot corner, because when they're as thin as they are at corner, then Ohio State kills their slot corner every year, and they're not the only one. People take advantage of Michigan. Now, do you then make him that guy? Which, of course, then who do you replace him with at safety? And there's this give and take that maybe they think they're deeper at corner now, and that's why they move Sammy Foston. I don't know that he can do the slot thing. I don't know. Really, I don't know what any of these guys can do, because we've never seen them play before, because they don't play. And now we're going to get to witness them probably cycle through guys because they're going to be making mistakes. But I think when you look at, when we talk about who can start at Ohio State, I don't know where Daxton Hill would start at Ohio State, but like, is he more proven than Marcus Hooker and Josh Proctor? I think so. But can he play that deep role? I don't know. I guess, can he be that single high safety for Ohio State? Maybe you give him a shot, and he'd certainly be in the mix. I know that for sure. And I wouldn't think it would be a downgrade to have him in that lineup. I don't know that I would say the same for Brad Hawkins. Ohio State could put, Proctor or whomever there, and I think they'd be just fine. But like, for me, Daxton Hill is the wild card here. He's the guy that's kind of like Tommy Togiai. Does Ohio State have anybody better than Hill at safety?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe. Josh Proctor, maybe. Those are two Oklahoma kids, right? Wasn't Daxton Hill an Oklahoma kid? Or he was looking at Oklahoma. Maybe he was deciding against Oklahoma. Maybe these are two safeties who were looking at going to Oklahoma. Somehow Daxton Hill has something with Oklahoma. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Daxton Hill, I think, is one of those guys where he's I don't know exactly where he fits on the Ohio State defense, but they talk about getting the best players out on the field. Mm-hmm. He's probably one of those best players that you get out on the field somewhere. It's like you get that you get your best five guys and you put them in, you figure out a way to get them on the field. Like he's in that group. I don't think there's anyone else on that defensive backfield that would be like that for Ohio State. Yeah, you have been just gushing, just effusive with your praise for Brad Hawkins, and I'm right there with you. Like in my notes, it just says Brad Hawkins has been fine. Like, it's just like he's there. He is like he's the congressman that just sort of votes present. Like, yep, okay, I was here. All right, good, perfect attendance, great job. There's just it's like wholly unremarkable, and he's like. And he's been there for a couple of years, right? This is like his third year of being sort of rotation guy there. And it's just, I know that we have the longstanding theory that, you excellence and anonymity for safeties, like that Jordan Fuller was just kind of this forgotten guy last year, but Michigan was also giving up big plays. So it wasn't exactly like Jordan Fuller back there. So, sure. Senior year returning starter, like at this point, like you are what you are at this point. If you're a senior and you haven't, you've played for a few years, and it's like, okay, it's fine. Like you don't have the, top 50 kind of recruiting pedigree to suggest like, yeah, there's way more in here. Like it's fine. So yeah, this is, if you want to go safeties, I think you could at least push it. Brad Hawkins is a little more experienced than, more experienced than Marcus Hooker. And Marcus Hooker is sort of an unknown at this point. And Daxton Hill and Josh Proctor, to me, are pretty similar players. Proctor has one more year of experience, but I think, in terms of recruiting pedigree, those are very similar players. So, like, if you wanted to push this, that'd be fine. If you wanted to give one to Michigan here, I wouldn't really fight you on it, but I don't feel real strongly about any of this. Like, it's just kind of like, this is another spot where it's like Ohio State doesn't have anything that you really, really feel super comfortable about, but Michigan also isn't like clearly better than them here. So, whatever you want to do here is fine. Like this is like when my wife asked me, like, what do you think? Which what color paint should we get? Should we get the light blue or the slightly darker light blue? And it's like, whatever you want to do, that's fine. That's this conversation. Like whatever you want to do here, is fine.
Brad Hawkins for me is a guy that Michigan should have recruited over eventually and never did. And so, yeah, he's got experience, but do you think Josh Proctor and Marcus Hooker would have been able to do as well or better than he has these last 2 years if they were playing in this defense?
Yeah, I think Josh Proctor probably is on the field last year in Michigan, and he was not really in Ohio State. I mean, and that's a Jordan Fuller versus Josh Metellus type conversation. But I think Josh Proctor is probably more productive. He's just more athletic. Like Brad Hawkins is just like, I mean, he's just a dude. Josh Proctor, you think back and I think the most recent impression that everyone has of Josh Proctor was the Fiesta Bowl, which did not go consistently great for him. But you go back over the previous year, it's just like you have seen from him that like sideline to sideline range and that playmaking where it's just like he makes those holy crap interceptions every once in a while. Like it's in there. You would think in his third year it will be in there more. You will see more of that. Like I think you've seen what you're going to see out of like a Hawkins. Daxton Hill is like that. I think Daxton Hill and Proctor both maybe have some of those holy crap plays in them, but I think in terms of upside, I would take Hooker over Hawkins at this point.
Yeah, and if I recall, Hawkins was a guy who Ohio State turned down, tried to work out for an offer in person, and I think they said no thanks and decided to go in another direction. So, let's go ahead and push it. We'll just push with that being the amount of faith we have in Daxton Hill and maybe the number of questions we have in Proctor and Hooker without seeing them. And we can revisit that down the road, and I wouldn't be shocked if by the end of the season it's clear cut in favor of Hooker and Proctor.
Speaking of punting, let's go to special teams.
Where Ohio State returns their kicking specialist and their punter, which is great. And those guys are, both veterans. Drew Chrisman, the punter, Blake Hallbill, the place kicker. Tom, do you want to do special teams as a whole? Or are you talking like position by position here?
Whatever you want. Why don't we just do special teams on a whole? Because I'm not sure I'm going to have real hot punter takes here.
Yes, and so Michigan has Brad Robbins. They've got Jake Moody, Quinn Nordine, Will Hart. Like they've got all of these guys who have done this, have experience kicking and punting, but they've also been not great, which is why there's so many guys with experience doing it. Like they've had to give the job back and forth, and they've lost the job back and forth. And Ohio State has been consistent with Hallbill and Chrisman for the past 2 seasons for Hallbill, past 3 seasons for Chrisman. So I think the kicking aspect of it is in favor of Ohio State. The return aspect of it, returns don't exist anymore, Tom. So I don't know that factors in at all.
Yeah, I think kicker goes to Ohio State. I mean, just set aside the field goals. Let's just talk PATs. Michigan's kickers have missed 5 PATs in their careers, and Blake Hallbill is perfect so far. The only PAT Ohio State has missed in the last 3 seasons was Dominic DiMacchio when it was raining absolutely sideways and it was 76-5 against Miami at the very, very, very end of last year's game. And that's a walk-on second or third stringer missing a PAT. That's the only time Ohio State's missed one since 2017 or 16 or so. So
Tom never lays 71 points. Never.
I mean, if life has taught us anything, that I think the kicking to me is probably a pretty clear cut Ohio State. I mean, the complaints for Ohio State kicking is sometimes the kickoff placement isn't great. It's not ideal, but the coverage there, Ohio State's kickoff coverage has been great the last couple of years. They had issues in 2017. They've gotten it straightened out. They really haven't had issues. And then, I mean, punting, last year was a down year for Drew Chrisman. Last year was also kind of a down year for Will Hart for Michigan. And 2 years ago, I thought Chrisman was the best punter in the Big Ten 2 years ago, and they gave the Big Ten punter of the year to Will Hart, which is the kind of thing that only people in Big Ten country get worked up over. But Hart was not as good last year. So, but again, Michigan does the weird thing where they don't do the spread punt. They will. So Michigan will tend to give up more return yardage than Ohio State does. Like Ohio State, like generally, like at the end of the year, the number of punt return yardage given up by Ohio State is like 10 or less. Like you don't see guys returning punts. It's either they're getting downed or they're getting fair caught. And Michigan will give up a play on special teams every once in a while on punt. So I think I'd go with Ohio State here just based on that stuff. And Michigan also lost its projected long snapper, who announced he was turning pro. He was opting out for the season to focus on his NFL draft prospects, which that's a choice. And, Ohio State's long snapping is a little bit of a question. Bradley Robinson is replacing Liam McCullough this year. And, I say that's a little bit of a question just because we haven't really seen it. But if it's anywhere near the consistency that Liam McCullough had, then yeah, that'll be fine.
And maybe Will Hart will be better this year if he can, because this is something I think in 2018 where so many of his punts were touchbacks. And I think that was one of the things that Drew Chrisman was better than him at the time. And maybe that will be the deciding factor, but I really have no concerns about taking Ohio State's kicking game here. Coverage is fine as well. I mean, like I said, everybody has athletes to return kicks, but the rules make it so that there's no sense in returning kicks. And punting is so good now that even returning punts is difficult. So there is no Ted Ginn back here for anybody. So you can call the return game a wash, and I'll just take the Buckeyes with their kickers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ohio State. You look at the skill positions that Ohio State has. If they're putting a Garrett Wilson back there on punt or something like that, like that's probably better than whoever Michigan's putting back there at punt, unless it's maybe Daxton Hill. I don't know who they're looking at a punt return this year, but yeah, that's probably whatever that ends up being. It's probably would lean towards Ohio State just in terms of the raw athleticism they could put back there, and it probably doesn't make enough of a difference either way. So yeah, I just go with Ohio State based on the kicker, and everything else is like, yeah, it's close enough.
Yeah, because I mean, Giles Jackson did have a kickoff return for a touchdown last year, and Ohio State hasn't done that in a decade.
Yes, Jordan Hall, 2010 against Michigan.
So there you go. But again, if you're gonna decide this based on one kickoff, it's probably faulty on your part. So we'll go ahead and give that to the Buckeyes. Tom, that takes us to coaching. And we've got Jim Harbaugh has won many more games in the Big Ten than Ryan Day, has lost many more games in the Big Ten than Ryan Day, much more experience, has seen more things, has been to more bowl games, has been to fewer Big Ten championship games, but has seen it all. But I'm still probably going to go Ryan Day here because of, there's the head-to-head. There's the conference title. There's the playoff appearances. There's all of the winning. There's the lack of the losing. There is just the energy in the program. There is the way his players talk about him. Ryan Day. I'm not, Michigan players. I don't know that they talk really much about Jim Harbaugh, or that's worth printing. But it's hard for me now or for anybody. I would like to see the argument for somebody taking Jim Harbaugh over Ryan Day right now in a tail of the tape type of thing.
Well, it's funny. Right before we recorded this, I was reading something in the Detroit News on Sunday, and that they came out. I think it came out on Sunday, and it was sort of like a state of the program for Michigan. And the guy said he had texted a whole bunch of former Michigan players just to sort of get their thoughts on where the Michigan program is right now. And he said, I mean, like you said, like Michigan players, how much do they have to say about Jim Harbaugh? He said, well, there were a whole bunch of texts that just sort of didn't get returned. Like it was just, guys who normally text him back on stuff. He asked him, what do you think about the state of the program right now? It was just like, well, a lot of non-return texts. And we've talked about this before, but his contract is up in 2021, like after the 2021 season. And, I know they keep saying, oh yeah, we'll get it done. Oh yeah, we'll get it done. Oh yeah, it's coming soon. Like, well, the season's going to start this week and it still hasn't happened. Like, your contract is up in like 15 months. That's the equivalent of like in the coaching business, to have a contract that's up 15 months from now. That's the equivalent of like you're walking to the gas chamber and like, well, maybe it'll get extended and the governor will call. Like, maybe like you're a lot closer to the end than you'd like to be. You're not there yet, but Ryan Day's contract right now goes through 2026. And even before it got extended after last season, it was through 2023. And that was like, the first time unproven coach just gets a 4-year contract. This is Harbaugh's original contract. Nothing has been updated since his original contract. That's not right. Like, that is a huge red flag. And there's just a lot around the program that just like, the recruiting's not very good. I think they're 17th or 18th in recruiting right now for the upcoming class. Like, it's just the trend line of everything. Like that fourth down in overtime in 2016, that's the high point. Like, remember Jim Harbaugh doing this, like holding his hands a foot apart. That's it. When they were that far apart, like that's how close they were. That's it. That was a high point. It's been all downhill from there. He's 0-5 against Ohio State, 1-4 in bowl games, has not finished higher than 10th in the college in any of the final polls. I mean, it's just kind of like, and this was the guy that was, well, if this guy can't win here, no one can win here. Like, well, 5 years in, that he has not won. The trend is all in the wrong direction. And I mean, the schedule this year it's dicey. Like this, they're an underdog this weekend at Minnesota. You got Indiana, you got Wisconsin. Like, they could be 1-3. I don't think they're 1-3, but they could be 1-3 after 4 games this year. And it's like, oh, you want to give them an extension then? Like, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know how this ends, but it's just like, there is a way that they go 4-5 this year, and you're going to extend them then. Like, I don't know. There's a way this ends very poorly this year.
I used to think that if he couldn't do it, nobody could, until I watched how he's trying to do it. And I'm thinking any number of people could be doing what you're doing and having the same success that you are. And there's ways to win and to get better and to, have energy and to recruit and not just try to nail down, let's build a fence around Connecticut and Massachusetts. That's fine for Jeff Hafley. And maybe Jeff Hafley will do that when he's, as I keep saying, the next Michigan head coach. He can knock that down for you, but just the eyes aren't on the right prize. It's there's just I can see any number of people having the same amount of success that he is having. And you mentioned the lack of a contract, and people have called him Michigan's John Cooper. What if they extend his contract like the morning of the game this year?
Oh man.
And they're like, well, yeah, I get now you are Michigan's John Cooper because you just had your contract extended on the day of the game, and now you've just lost, 48-0 or something of that nature. So enjoy Arby's, I guess, at that point.
Ooh, I mean, there are a bunch of ways this doesn't go well for them this year. It's possible that they, maybe everything breaks right and the guys, the offensive line really is as good as they think it is. And the quarterback really is as good as they think he is. And the defensive ends really are as good as they think he is. And the defensive backs all developed the way they could. And the speed and space thing really does turn out really, to be truly fantastic. And it is really a bunch of Rondale Moores out there and they're making plays and it's really explosive. Like, okay, what does that look like? Is that 7-2 after the Big Ten championship game? I mean, are they 8-1? Can they go 8-1 this year and sneak into Indianapolis? I mean, is that like, what is the ceiling for this year's team? I think the floor for this year's team is like 4-5. What's the ceiling for this year's Michigan team? If everything breaks right, they don't have the talent on the roster, I don't think, to compete with Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State. I mean, like that level team in the college football playoff level team. I don't think they have the talent to match up with those teams. So what is the ceiling for this year's team? Is it win the Big Ten and then just get obliterated in the playoff? Like what is it?
That would be a dream season. dream scenario. Because could they win the Big Ten? I guess this year they probably could, just because, But then would you expect them to beat two playoff teams after that? No. I don't see how that would happen. And it would be a Michigan State 2015, Ohio State 2016 type of showing in the bowl game, or last year, the year before when Michigan played Alabama. It's just, they're not there yet. And I don't think they will get there. I'm pretty sure they won't get there under Jim Harbaugh. Even if they get there, they won't be there. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. I mean, like we said, they got close in 2016, and then the trend has been the wrong direction since then. Like they're not staying at the same level, and they're not getting better. They're getting slightly worse every year, and the recruiting keeps getting like not as good. Like the talent level, the expectation was that Ohio State was up here and Michigan was slowly going to rise and ending up kind of like catching up with Ohio State. In reality, Ohio State's recruiting kind of keeps going up and up and up, and Michigan's has actually tailed off. So, the talent level on the 2021 teams, Ohio State might be further ahead than they are this year. Just, the quarterback position will be kind of the big question next year for Ohio State. But, you overall, just like 1 to 85 on the roster, the talent level for Ohio State is probably better next year than it is this year. And the talent level for Michigan next year is probably worse than it is this year. And, that's not good news. You're getting further away from Ohio State. You're getting further away from the college football playoff level teams. And, and then at that point, like you're like basically Wisconsin. You're basically Minnesota. You're just like, you're one of those teams that's good, but not great. And you have a real hard ceiling that you can't break through. And, I don't know. The question I keep having with Harbaugh is like, when does the patience run out with him? John Cooper was going to get fired if he lost one more Michigan game. He lost 88, 89, 90, 91. Okay, that's 4. 92, the tie that was the greatest win in Ohio State history, kept him from being 0-5. Jim Harbaugh's already 0-5, and they have not broken glass in case of emergency. So, at what point does that stop being acceptable to lose to Ohio State every year? 0-6, 0-7, 0-8. Like, at some point, that has to not be acceptable if you are what you say you are. If you are, leaders and best and champions of the West, and those who stay will be champions. Those who stay have not been champions of the Big Ten since 2004. Like, you've got the kids you're recruiting right now were in diapers the last time Michigan won the Big Ten, like won a share of the Big Ten. I mean, that's insane. But apparently that's just like that is just the acceptable level now at Michigan, which is crazy to me.
Well, and that the Bush push has been talked about quite a bit this weekend. That 2016 Ohio State game, that was his Bush push. That was Charlie Weiss's best win, and that was probably Jim Harbaugh's best win. The irony is that like Charlie Weiss continued to recruit well even while things all went to hell. Like the recruiting at Michigan, if he could have recruited as well as Charlie Weiss, maybe then he could do something. But yeah, it's just been all downhill ever since. And it's one thing to finally stop the skid, but then you've got to go back up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that he's the guy for that.
Well, you have to, if you're going to beat Ohio State, you're going to catch up to Ohio State in recruiting. You have to pass them. You have to do better than them at some point. Like, when is Michigan going to finish with a better recruiting class than Ohio State? And this is something I tweeted out this weekend because it was the 5th anniversary of that crazy final play punt against Michigan State. 5 years into his tenure, that game is the most damage he's done to Ohio State's playoff hopes. Because if Michigan had just punted that ball away successfully, that Michigan State has 2 Big Ten losses that year, and Ohio State still wins the Big Ten East, still probably beats Iowa in the playoff in the Big Ten championship game, and then goes to the college football playoff. So that crazy punt that all the Ohio State fans point and laugh at, that's the most damage he's done to Ohio State's college football playoff hopes at any point in his 5 years, which is, that's real damning that, this crazy, you found the banana peel, accidentally damaged Ohio State. And that's the most you've been able to do anything to them in 5 years.
You say damning, I say diabolical. That's the level 4D chess that he is on. So Tom, are we giving this to Harbaugh then?
Was that your takeaway from this? I'm not sure that was my takeaway. I'm not sure that was my takeaway. Yeah, I think you probably have to go with Ryan Day, and I think that there will be an argument made that Ryan Day is coasting off of the fumes of the Urban Meyer era, but I think you also have to look at the 2019 team was far more consistent than either of Meyer's, any of Meyer's last 4 teams. I mean, they did not have the banana peel game against Purdue or Iowa. They did not have like weeks and weeks where they just looked like they could not get pointed in the right direction like the 2015 team did. Like they were very, very consistent. The recruiting has actually gotten better under Day than it was under Meyer. So, this is not, I don't think, a Larry Coker situation where, you're just sort of coasting on the fumes of the previous administration and looking great because of that. He seems like he's taken it up another level. And, as long as Ryan Day stays at Ohio State, I don't think that there's going to be a better coach in the Big Ten than he is based on what we've seen so far.
Well, let's see what happens at Michigan State before we go crazy and start making some outrageous statements. Okay.
Yeah, we can do tail of the tape Michigan versus Michigan State. Michigan fans would like that one a lot better, I think.
Well, so based on my jotting things down right now, we had a push at running back and a push at safety. Was that all that is that correct, Tom?
We had talked about it with defensive line, but I think you probably went with Ohio State there. So yeah, I think
we went with Tommy Togiai over.
Yeah. I think that's probably about right. And there you could argue, okay, there's a couple places where maybe you could push it if you wanted to. You could push defensive line if you wanted to. You could. There are certain linebacker spots where the Mike. If you want to give Michigan the Mike linebacker spot, like okay, but there's nowhere where Michigan is a clear winner. And there's like half of the field where Ohio State's a clear winner. And, when you get to the Saturday of the game and, if Ohio State wins by 3 touchdowns again or 4 touchdowns again, it's cute that you have the people who are saying, well, it's because Justin Fields is doing online classes. Like, no, because Ohio State has better football players and probably better football coaches. Like, I know that the Justin Fields thing was like this cute little thing last year that they don't care about. Okay. All right. That's fine. Like everyone does online classes. Guess what everyone's doing this fall? Online classes. Guess why? Because it's 2020. Congratulations. You can do these things now. We don't all have to do things the way we did them in 1994. And, but yeah, that's it. I mean, it's talent. It is, as a guy that we know, who's recently moved to Dallas likes to say, stars matter. It does. It is an important part of the process to talent accumulation. And Ohio State has just flatly been better at that than Michigan or anyone else in the Big Ten for the last 10 years. So therefore they've been a better team for the last 10 years.
You did make a good point that while we did this, we didn't even factor into Michigan is taking online courses now. I forgot to factor that in. So that raises everybody up a level. As we know, that makes everybody better. That turned Justin Fields from just a guy into a Heisman candidate. And so now you got to think that uplifts the entire Michigan program. You wanted to know how Jim Harbaugh was going to get Michigan to catch up with Ohio State. I give you online classes, Tom. And so now this is an even footing. I feel foolish having done this tale of the tape and not having factored in the most important element, which is online learning. My apologies.
We'll hit stop on this, and then before we post it, I want to go place a bet on this year's game before people hear this and the line moves 7 points. I don't want to mess this up for anyone else, or mess this up for I don't care about anyone else.
Right.
It's up for myself. So yeah, we'll get some money in before the line jumps a touchdown. Michigan's taking online classes. Wait a minute.
Stop the presses. All right, that'll do it. Thank you all for tuning in for the annual tale of the tape between Michigan and Ohio State. Turns out Ohio State might be better this year. We'll see. Who knows? But this was a fun exercise. It's always a fun exercise. And we appreciate you guys tuning in. Tom, what's coming up on the Morning Scoop tomorrow?
Well, we will have one Mr. Tony Gerdeman, who writes about Ohio State football, I think. He will be joining me to talk about, hey, guess what? It's an Ohio State football game week. 4 days. Well, as of Monday anyway, there will be 4 days till the first Big Ten game, 5 days till the first Ohio State game. We'll talk a little bit about that, getting to cover a game this year, what that might look like, because we have officially heard, yes, you're in. You will get to be one of like 500 people who gets to watch this week's Ohio State game in person. Get to talk a little bit about that, and then maybe do a little bit of an early preview of that and some of the other games, and maybe talk a little bit about Alabama, Georgia, and some of the other miscellaneous stuff from last weekend or last.
Right, sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait. So we will say goodbye. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you guys later in the week.